Hello. I would like to thank you, all of you, for your online participation in our social media campaign, Building the Future We Want. We are very happy that that campaign was led to so many comments, and participants followed the ECOSOC ministerial meeting on the 24th of September. So I would like to address some of the questions that were posted at that time. I probably will not be able to address all of them, or not in the necessary detail, but I'll do my best. Let me start with a question that was posted by Pierre-Yves Brunet. He asked us particularly a question in relation to Rio+20, the meeting that was known as the Earth Summit that recently was organized, or had organized its follow-up session 20 years after the first meeting in Rio de Janeiro, which deals with development, sustainable development, covering environment, the social affairs, and economic affairs. And the question goes particularly in the sense of what are we doing to implement the results of the agreements that we were able to reach in this particular conference a few months ago. The answer is obviously quite a complex one, because the document is a very rich document. Let me start by saying that the main responsibility we have as a follow-up is to try to get a better balance in the integration of the three chapters of sustainable development: the economic, the social, and the environmental chapter. We have set up in Rio a number of processes, working groups, and particularly develop an idea of establishing a high-level forum that will be able to meet with some regularity in order to find that balance. What we need is to introduce the environmental dimension into the development programs of the United Nations, and at the same time pay due attention to the social agenda. For the time being, part of the problem is that the three pillars have been developed quite independently, and sometimes we have not been sufficiently careful in balancing those approaches. We have, in other words, kind of a fragmented agenda, and the main purpose after Rio is to avoid that fragmentation. We will certainly need to develop a number of programs and particularly goals following from Rio, but we will need to do it in the context of the discussions that we are having in parallel with the Millennium Development Goals, so that the post-2015 agenda will both cover the continuation of the Millennium Development Goals that were agreed in 2000, but will include the sustainable angle, or the sustainability input. In that sense, we may be able to talk about sustainable development goals that will be the ones that we will be working on post-2015. In addition to that, we are also working on the green economy and trying to facilitate and support action by different countries to move towards an economy that would be greener, an economy that will make a much better use of sustainable energy. Just to give you an example, that will be more careful with climate change, will reduce dramatically the level of emissions that we are producing, etc. So that we work both at the level of the integration of an agenda, and at the same time with very specific actions at the national level. This goes very much in line with other questions that we have received. For instance, Claudia Olsson asked us about the way we intend to address precisely these sustainability challenges, and whether we can bridge the digital divide. And in that sense, I think it is important to highlight that the effort to get into a greener economy and a much more efficient use of energy, etc., will also need to make a better use of new technologies. And there are a number of initiatives, some initiatives that are developed together with the private sector. I will highlight, for instance, a declaration that has been agreed by very important private companies dealing with information technologies that will come to support actions by the United Nations in reducing the cost of communications and helping for the development processes both at the national, regional and international level. This kind of joint ventures with the private sector and with other non-governmental organizations is very much in line of what we need to do. To give you an idea, if we want to reduce emissions to a point on which we will be able to maintain the increase in the average temperature below 2 degrees by 2015, we will need to invest around $100 billion per year. And out of that $100 billion per year, no less than half will need to come from the private sector. That's why it is so important that we start building partnerships and developing a common agenda. It's not only for governments. In addition to that, you also need to build those partnerships with local governments. We need to get the greater involvement of particular groups of interest, including women, indigenous peoples, and obviously young people. There is another question that particularly refers to the participation of young people and the need for them to be much more involved into the ongoing processes. Jess Grogan asked that question, and to him I would say basically that there are a number of spaces or opportunities for young people to get engaged. Young people have been identified since '92 as one of the main constituencies that has to be involved into the discussions and the decision-making processes dealing with sustainable development. Those constituencies are very actively participating in the negotiations. I would highlight in particular the participation of young people into the climate change ongoing negotiations. And the aim to get into a treaty, a new treaty that will complement or replace the Kyoto Protocol by 2015. That new instrument will obviously aim to increase dramatically the commitments to reduce emissions, but more specifically to make a better distribution of the responsibilities of countries. From 2015, we expect a greater number of countries to commit through a legally binding instrument to reduce emissions, and young people are playing a very important role in setting up that agenda. I would say that it is particularly or especially important in some of the developed countries on which the support to the reduction of emissions is still very, very weak. And even the opposition, a strong opposition to any legally binding commitment remains. Don't forget that there are some countries, and I certainly refer myself also to the US, on which there is no support for a legally binding instrument. The United States has not ratified the Kyoto Protocol, and we need to make sure that the new instrument we will be able to develop will have all major emitters on board. There is also a concern among the community on the way we can reinforce peace and security in dealing with the development agenda, the sustainable agenda. This is a question that has been placed by Global Peace Index, and I think it is quite a relevant question or observation. The linkage between peace and sustainable development, or development as in general, is probably not that evident to many of our friends, and certainly not even to sort of all of the countries which are involved. But for me, it's fundamental. I cannot conceive peace without development, or development without peace. And when you look into areas of conflict, you will see that very frequently this interlinkage is at the origin of the conflict, and frequently it is also part of the solution. That's why we have developed at the United Nations what we call the Peace Building Commission, on which, in addition to the interventions by military forces that are from time to time necessary, the so-called blue helmets or peacekeeping operations, we are already developing an agenda post-conflict, or in some cases even to prevent conflicts. And that agenda includes a number of elements to facilitate, to strengthen the development of the country or the areas on which the conflict may emerge. If you do not have access to water, access to food, jobs, education, etc., it's likely that the conflict will emerge, and certainly the effects of the conflict are going to be much bigger. So those are some of the questions that we have received. Questions that had to do with the work that we are trying to develop and the kind of partnerships that we need to establish. But let me once again welcome all the questions that have been presented, and engage on behalf of the ECOSOC to continue this dialogue, to be able to reply some of your questions, and probably also to be able to receive some of your suggestions on how things could be done. Not only to be able to tell you what we are doing, but eventually to test new ideas that could help us advancing a common agenda, an agenda that is, and I would like to underline this, is not an agenda that can be dealt by governments alone. Increasingly, a number of actors, a number of stakeholders need to get involved, and they will only get involved on a permanent basis if they feel that their own proposal, their own ideas are taken into account, that they are part of the decision-making processes and not just observers, not just people eventually supporting or opposing ideas that have been presented at the United Nations. In other words, the UN of tomorrow is a UN which needs to open its doors to a greater level of influence and participation. And I hope through this campaign, in building the future we want, we will be able to do it in that spirit.